Hello, and welcome to our next presentation. On behalf of the MIT CDOIQ Virtual Symposium, we'd like to thank all of our sponsors who have continued to support the symposium during this very challenging year. Before we thank our partners, we'd like to ask that sometime during the symposium's breaks that you visit our partners' virtual booths. You can also visit the Content Hub on the MIT CDOIQ website for some great partner resources. We'd like to thank the following partners: Deloitte, Informatica, Privacy and Analytics, CDOIQ, Fusion Alliance, KPMG, Sandal Consultants, Tamer, Elation, Ali Data, Big ID, Boomi, Caserta, Citizen, Data Kitchen, Garage, Wakira, Pylog, Click, ThoughtSpot, Eckerson, Global IDs, Snowflake, Starburst. And as I said, please make every effort to visit our partners, use the virtual passport, because without them and our partner support, the symposium could not be held. Thank you.
Combat Capabilities Development Command Data and Analysis Center. Another mouthful, but you can't be in the Department of Defense without having a mouthful. He works at the Army's Futures Command, and his division is responsible for heading up collaboration across the department there to provide insights into the data that they have. I also have a Mr. Chris Moore, and I apologize for the video on this one, but I want to do justice to them. He's the Vice President of Data Services with the Conference of State Bank Supervisors. He leads a team of analysis to solve different issues and tools, reporting, and research associated with his mission area, and I welcome him to be a part of the conversation. Before I turn it over to each of them, so who am I and what do I do? My job is generally described as best enterprise management for the acquisition system. And in the acquisition system, what are we talking about? We're talking about major defense programs, all the programs in the Department of Defense. Where do we get that data from, and how do we feed the senior leaders, the Office of Management and Budget, our Undersecretary, and principally we serve for her, Miss Ellen Lord, who is the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment. And her roles are very wide-ranging, everything from deciding on programs to leading the acquisition system, as we like to call it, in both policy, process, data, and organization. And she has been a great leader in helping us work through that. And one of her principal tenets has been focused on data. And in the organization that I've listened to before, the name has changed about 1,000 times. We have worked to manage enterprise data across all the major programs and the services and components within the department so that we can provide data to both Congress for our reporting methods, for us in terms of using the data and assembling these reports, and now moving into a much more analytic environment. And it's not without the extreme partnership of the services and the components that we have helped lead that by establishing a data strategy across the department for all programs. Now, to give you some sense of what those programs are, you could think about them as big planes, big ships, big tankers associated with that. And we refer to them as major defense programs. We also have programs that fall below the thresholds of that reporting mechanism, and total 4,000 to 5,000 programs as we try to line that data throughout the services. What we've been able to do is to create an alignment based upon an acquisition visibility data framework, or a framework for us by which we lead and guide to determine, one, the authoritative sources, two, what the authoritative data means when it gets to us. And it also creates a bit of latitude for the services to manage as they complete their supply chains. It has been profoundly important for us and to have a federated strategy with the services, because they recognize that it helps them and their mission areas in completing the mission. It's not been data for data's sake or data solely for reporting. It's been data to help us better have insight and analyze programs as we move into new world orders, to where we value the analytics of organization, where the data moves quickly and we can see trends and take whatever actions are necessary across the department. But enough about what I do. I hope to explore the topics of data and data management through this, but I'd like to turn it over a bit to Mike McCarthy. And Mike, tell us a little bit about what your role is, and how do you see data management and supporting the analytics from your vantage point?
Yeah, absolutely, Mark. Yeah, appreciate the intro. Certainly appreciate the opportunity to be here, participate in this. So, and listening to you, I think a lot of what we do is, if not complementary, foundational to your job, right? So you're at the Defense Department level, and I'm in one of the services, and the data application I'm going to focus on today is part of our mission to provide system performance data to analysis organizations across the Army. So, before we get into that, I'll give you a little context of sort of who we are, where we fit. So, the Data and Analysis Center is part of the, as you said, the Combat Capabilities Development Command, which is the organization within the Army that does the science and technology development for the Army. And so, it's no accident that our analysis organization is embedded with that group. We're one of three pretty sizable analysis organizations in the Army. Our focus is on system analysis, understanding how those systems operate, how we can do things like support them in the field, how we can understand their vulnerability. We do a lot of human factors analysis, and how the soldier is going to be able to interact with the system. But performance is a big piece of that. So, the other two analysis organizations, are more at the operational level, looking at force on force. How do these systems behave when they're put in a simulated combat, and the other is at the strategic level. So the work that we do is really foundational to all of that analysis that the other organizations are doing, and really up to the Defense Department level. So, this mission of providing system performance data isn't new. As far back as the 1940s, one of our predecessor organizations funded development of the ENIAC, which is pretty widely recognized as the first digital computer. So, we had that ENIAC came to Aberdeen Proving Ground, a building I used to work in. We used that to develop firing tables for artillery. So basically, making predictions about where artillery shells are going to fall when we fire them. So that fundamentally that's performance data, right? And that data was used by soldiers in the field. We continue to produce that type of data for operational users. Another big application, as I alluded to, of our performance data is feeding combat simulation. So when the Army wants to buy a new system, we want to understand how that system is going to perform in combat. So, somebody might come and say, well, I can make a tank gun fire 1,000 meters further. What we want to do is put that in the context of a battle, understand, well, gee, is something else already covering that extra 1,000 meters that you get? And so maybe you're better off making that investment in a faster helicopter, say. So obviously, it's pretty tough to wait for a war to come along before you can gain those types of insights. So we rely very heavily on combat simulation, and the system performance data is the lifeblood of those combat sims. So as far as data analytics, data challenges within our organization, with a mature data mission, data application like that, that's kind of a double-edged sword, right? So on the one hand, we've come in with mature processes and ways of doing business. On the other hand, we have mature processes and ways of doing business, so there's not a lot of incentive to change and adapt to all the progress we've seen in data science over the past several years. And so our challenge has been, where to hold on to, where to keep those good practices that we've had and have established, and where we can embrace some of these opportunities to do our job better. So I'll pause there to let Chris talk, but certainly there's some specific challenges around that, and opportunities to embrace these new techniques. So I'm looking forward to the discussion. Over.
All right. Thank you, Chris. And for those of you not in the military, you will always hear military people say over. We're done. We know when we're done our conversations. Like to hand it over to Chris Moore. Chris, tell us a little bit about what you're doing and how you see all this fitting and where you intend to go.
All right. Well, I'm jealous of Mike's very interesting job. It's always been a challenge to explain to my kids what I do. If it had something to do with rockets and things firing, they would consider that really awesome. I'm in the realm of financial services regulation, and their eyes just start to glaze over at that point. CSBS is a very old organization, been around since 1902. Bringing state governments together, and specifically the division or department at each state that supervises financial services. This includes banks, which everybody knows what a bank is, but over the past few decades, that's really expanded into a very diverse ecosystem of financial services. You may be familiar with PayPal, Venmo, you may be familiar with Quicken Loans. Those are the big players in the non-bank space, but there's thousands of other small check cashers and lenders that operate, and those are all regulated by the states. Our organization was asked by the state government departments essentially to stand up a tech startup. In 2008, we launched a system that gave essentially a transactional system to regulate and monitor and license all of these financial service providers. So this was essentially a digital transformation process for many of the states. It was in many states still at that time still very paper oriented. And so the creation of the platform in 2008, as you can imagine, created a bunch of data. And so you can just imagine what the evolution was going to look like. It wasn't long before they realized we needed somebody to not just focus on building this transactional system, but mining the data out of it, exploring it, answering questions about what we were seeing in that data. Furthermore, states were already collecting data about these companies, again, often in the form of paper submissions on, say, a quarterly basis. They were asked to submit financial information or activity information so that the regulators could have a sense of what they were doing, what volume of activity they were engaged in. And so that triggered another step and phase for our organization, which was to see if we could bring the states together to align around data standards. And if you've been involved in data standard development, you know that it can be a challenge. It depends on how many participants there are in the discussion. And for us, there are over 60 independent sovereign state agencies that are potentially all doing their own thing. And so part of what my team has been doing is not just providing the analysis, but participating in the data standard development. So we've had to develop over the years a very elaborate governance process to make sure that all the stakeholders are part of the standards development process. Both what is collected, the definitions around those items that are collected. Now, the good news is because we've been at this since 1902, we're used to bringing all of these sovereign entities together around a common cause. So when I think especially of data management, in our experience at least, which is a very short, I feel like we've just gotten started in many respects, providing this service to the state agencies. But for us, it has been both extraction of transactional data and figuring out how to manage and govern those pieces of information that are being collected, and then also developing data standards that streamline things so that when you are a PayPal and have to report to 50 different states, we're aligning around a standard. And so specifically, we've developed standards for the mortgage industry and the money services industry, and we're now currently working on the consumer finance industry. Which are all requests of the industry. They are asking for data standards, so there's simplicity in reporting. And then of course, when there's standardization of that reporting, the data becomes all the more valuable. It's when it's non-standardized and you're trying to make your best guess of how things fit together that you really start to lose your mind sometimes as someone in charge of data management. But that's a quick overview of CSBS and our still relatively new enterprise of gathering and collecting and analyzing data for the states.
All right, well, great. Thank you, Chris. And to the audience, I'll solicit any questions you have. We have a good, 40 minutes or so to talk about it. And I have a few questions. Chris, I'm going to follow up with you first. You talked about reporting. I had a similar problem associated with reporting, and I call it the bias of reporting. We were so interested in, and it was steeped in our institution, and it, as Mike said, sometimes we live with what we did yesterday. That breaking that mindset that data was not only used for reporting, but used for analysis and analytics has been a huge hurdle for me. How about for you? Have you seen anything because you seem to be going across one side to the other, getting the data, seeing where the data governance gaps are, identifying those gaps, closing those gaps, and then keep pressing on, which is a great strategy. How did you deal with, the difference between bias of reporting and analytics in the data governance?
That is a challenge, and I think you've put your finger on something that is probably our biggest priority right now. So we've had the privilege of landing Chris Rowley as our Chief Data Officer, who brings a lot of experience. And one of the things that Chris said to me early on, in terms of how he thinks about the vision for analytics and what its ability is, he often engages leaders, and leaders ask him to do projects, and he says, well, why would you want me to do that? And they say, well, it would be interesting. He's like, I don't do interesting, I do useful. And I think that is the challenge that we face right now, is that we've laid I would say, a very robust framework, both in digitizing systems, which is creating information, and then consolidating around data standards, which is creating uniform information. And so I think we now have a valuable array of data assets. The question is, how will they be used? And the challenge that my team faces is really engaging the subject matter experts. In our language, these are examiners. So these are state government employees who go out and examine and supervise companies under the mandate to protect consumers. The challenge is they've been doing this for decades without this data. And so now that we have these data assets, the challenge that we're facing is, how do we help them evolve into a more data-oriented process when they have a very well-worn path that, again, under the mandate to protect consumers. So they're doing their best to protect consumers. So trying to engage them and say, is there another way to do it? Sometimes it's a faster, more efficient way, and we can cut with the grain and see where we can really pre-calculate a lot of the things that they have to do themselves on a day-to-day basis, let the computer do the heavy lifting. But it really is a mindset change. And I think that's the next phase for us, and really the thrust of a lot of conversations we're having is, where can analysis change the way things are done? And people don't like to change sometimes. So that's the dance that we're undertaking right now, is because even though my team is full of very smart, bright young people, no matter how much they put on their imaginative hat, they can't replicate what it means to be an examiner. And so that's why we're having to have a lot of conversations and talking about analysts doing ride-alongs with the examiner to watch and observe the current process, and to look at opportunities for it not just to be data in, data flowing out in a very generic sense, but this very iterative, innovative process to say, how do we strengthen what you're doing, leverage the resources and the skills and the decades of experience you have, but in a new way that presents new insights. So that's really the phase we're in. You put your finger on it.
Yeah, I think you were much too easy. The changes, I think it's sometimes impossible. People just don't want to change unless you tell them where they're going to. It's fascinating. I'm going to go over to Mike, because you touched on that point of changing people. And I suspect, or at least I heard a little bit in this conversation from Mike, that talked about, we've been doing this stuff for a long time, and you'd get a requirement. And Mike, how do you deal with the workforce of changing from, okay, here's the requirement, test for the requirement. Okay, here's what we now see. Here's other opportunities. How do you think about that? Is that a problem for you in the role that you play? And how do you see that?
Sure. Yeah. So a few things there. So our organization, we're an analysis organization, right? So we've done operations research analysis for years and years. Operations research analysis, like data science, is a multidisciplinary field that relies on statistics, math, computer science, all those other things. And so, we've really, I guess, struggled with, well, what's really new here in this data science boom in the last several years. So we're, I'm sorry, I'm getting a buzzing. Is that from me? I apologize. All right, looks like that's gone. So, but yeah, so where I talk about embracing new techniques, fortunately, so we've got our data is produced by about 12 different teams spread across our organization, probably 30 to 40 people. So among those, we've had, a few, early adopters, right, who've really embraced the new techniques with enthusiasm and really, tried to push forward. And, an example of where we've had success at using some of these, relatively new data science techniques has been in, doing data quality control, where we've been able to do some machine learning algorithms to look for outliers in the data, flag them to our experts, and have them, dig in and verify. Sometimes it's a problem, sometimes it's just a counterintuitive but accurate result. But so those things can be tremendous time savers, and finding the opportunities and creating the opportunities for sort of the cross fertilization from one area to another has been a big thrust in our organization. So we've stood up a data science community of practice where we can have folks come in with lessons learned and share some things that work for them, and look for opportunities to adopt them in some other areas. So I'm not sure if that got to your question exactly, Mark, so I'll let you kind of follow up if you want.
Yeah, it does. I mean, in many ways, because we all have different roles and different responsibilities associated with that. And as you said, ops research has been around forever. It's not new to us. And, we hear the term data science and you're like, well, how's that different? And, were we not exploiting data? Were we not exploiting analysis for, 200 years of this nation? The answer is absolutely we were. The question is, the speed of which that does is a very different matter, and access seems to be a different matter. Obviously you have a certain amount of data feeds and a certain amount of data outputs for that. Would other data help? How do you create that cross fertilization? You alluded to it a bit earlier with the portfolio discussion. If I'm a tanker, I'm worried about tracks. I'm not worried about propellers. That's a whole different matter. How do you see that community evolving in the department?
Yeah, I'll latch on to the point you made about data access, right? And I think probably that's a challenge probably as well as I do within the Department of Defense. I think our nature is to kind of try to keep things close hold, and so the nature of our job is trying to understand these new technologies as they come along. So working with the science and technology developers, working with project managers as they develop new things, they're not always incentivized to share early on. And so, there's a lot of technical challenges we face, but there's also a lot of policy challenges that we face as well. And so, so one thing I'll talk a little about the Army Futures Command and the stand up of that as a new organization. I think one of the first groups that they stood up as a command was a data science cell in the headquarters. And so I think, you know, that command recognized early on that, you know, this creating a culture of sharing, as a culture of collaboration, culture of sharing, as opposed to this sort of a, hey, we're competing for limited dollars, you know, let's not tip our hand too early. I think, you know, the Futures Command is taking that very seriously. I think we've got a long way to go as far as anytime you're changing culture, that a lot of chipping away before you see results. But that is something that's very important, very important within the Army, and I think across the Defense Department.
Well, I'll help you with a little bit of data points for you. The National Defense Authorization Act from a couple of years ago, 9/11, 9/12, said all data will be transparent. And in the acquisition community, Ms. Lord signed out a memo at our urging to all the components and the senior acquisition executives that their data must be made transparent to all that need it. So we're pushing from a policy and organizational perspective down. And as you so aptly point out, culture is the hardest thing to change. And in my mind, what we've done and how we co-opted, if you will, the Army, Navy, and Air Force is we provided value to them, something that they weren't doing, that they needed to do, that didn't take their money. And, you know, we were, you know, I'm just the data guy. So in nurturing that change, I consider my best brethren being the Army, Navy, and Air Force, because they're like, well, if you're going to do it, I don't have to do it. And if you do it, I'll just copy your homework and we all win. And they can pull in through the Futures Command and different organizations. They can push down and across the organization, where if we do it, we're doing it with a 30-mile screwdriver trying to fix a program from that far away. And we're sensitive to that. So, you know, while I consider myself a bit of a data wonk, I consider myself much more a transformation wonk and a social engineer of trying to lead the community through data management, good data management practices, to provide values wherever they are. And with that, Chris, culture. You talked a bit about the culture on your side of the house with the bank examiners in the state. Do you have forums? I mean, were there any really quick wins there? And how do you keep the young people engaged? Because, you know, fighting bureaucracies are sometimes difficult.
It is a challenge, and it is a cultural issue. I'm encouraged. You referenced the fact that there's a human tendency to resist change, but sometimes change is thrust upon you. And between the Great Recession and then now the period that we're in now, state government budgets are being hammered.
Right.
And so there will be a little bit of that being the mother of invention. And so I don't want to come across as I'm exploiting the woes of state budgets for change, but I will say that the leadership of the state government departments has said we have to change. And so the challenge there is that such a vision doesn't necessarily trickle down, because at least the examiners I interact with, they still have their marching orders and they still have the things that they need to get done. And they're doing so with fewer resources than before. They're not replacing people that are being retired, for example. And so their staffs are cut short. And so from their perspective, they just have more work. Mm-hmm. And so for me to come in with a new tool seems like I'm just adding more work. And right. So that really is the challenge that we'll face. And, you know, we're looking, I think there was a reference, I think, from Mike to early adopters. I think we are right now soliciting some state agencies maybe that are in a position to do something experimental, either because they're so desperate they have to try something different, or because they're maybe more cutting edge and are open to have leadership that's always prized innovation. So We're actually in the midst of framing up several different pilots and kind of beta processes that we're looking to recruit some states to test out. So that's been the most recent thing, because we kind of went through phase one, which was digitizing the landscape, went through phase two of building out the analysis. Now we're really at phase three, where we need a culture change. So I wish I had more to report in terms of getting that done. I will say that what encourages me is that we've seen a very consistent message from the top. And so now it really is the implementation. I was even speaking with one of the leaders at one of the states. And again, these leaders are typically members of a cabinet in a state government. And he kind of conveyed, look, I have this vision. I know this is where we need to go. And I know that some of my people may not want to go there. But I want your team to really get in the mix, and we have to make some changes and keep me posted. I'm coaching them up. I need you to coach them up. And, if you need me to come grease some skids, let me know. And so that change is really complicated. So people need to be able to see the value in it. They need to kind of own it for themselves, that they have a desire to embark on that change process. Sometimes you have to be told you like it. Really, you see for yourself that you like it. But we don't want to force things down people's throats. Like, if we're not adding value, if we're not actually helping them fulfill the mandate that they have to get done, we don't want tools out there just for tools' sake. I'm not just concerned with job security. There's plenty of job security for people doing data science right now. But we are very much on the front lines of a culture change in the state governments on this.
Oh, top cover. Important? Not important? How important?
I think it's essential, but that alone doesn't get the job done. Right. There's a lot of, we don't have actual lieutenants and sergeants, in the state, in our structure, but it goes down through all those levels, and we have to understand that different people have a different perspective on the adoption of analysis into what they're doing, if that's not part of what they're doing today. So we really have to have a very high relational touch, is what we found. Mm-hmm. Just sending memos and recorded demos and things like that, again, people just view that as more work, and nobody wants more work. So you do have to get in there and listen. And again, I think part of it for us, we have found some success with pilots, because then you have a story to tell. And furthermore, it's a little bit different if one of the examiners or a team of examiners that's kind of taken a step forward can tell their colleagues what they're doing, as opposed to the data nerds trying to tell them, how to do their job better, because we don't know how to do their job better. Right. So that's where we're at.
Well, it's I know you use that tag data nerd here, but you sound to be much more than that. You're very attuned to the social engineering and the audience, because everybody from the top to the bottom of understanding. So it is more than just tools, techniques, and systems. It is the storytelling, depending on how it works, or the advocacy is the term I like to use. My boss said, "You're a bit of a salesperson." And I said, "I don't think it's sales. I think it's advocacy, because I don't have a product to sell." Mike, how's your top cover? And Elizabeth, you tell me in the chat window that I have a question from the audience, but I don't see the question, or I would have asked it by now. So that's a signal to that. But Mike, how about your top cover organizationally, and how do you deal with the transition pieces up and down the organization? Do you have multi-pronged attack?
Yeah, yes, it needs to be, right? So, we do have lieutenants and sergeants and a chain of command in the Army. So, with top cover, nothing's going to get done, right? So, when the 4-star, 2-star general says, you're going to share data, you're going to do this, we're going to salute and do it. But again, I think we talked a little bit about culture, right? So that's necessary, but not sufficient, right? And so, even as you alluded to, National Defense Authorization Act, there's language in the law, there's language in policy. there's still a reluctance of people to always share their data. And so, if it's one thing to be told to do it, it's another to, okay, well, what's the loophole, right? So it's, can I avoid kind of broadly sharing by saying, well, I don't trust people to use this properly, or things like that. So, yeah. So, I mean, to summarize the top cover, absolutely important. But again, it's really a campaign, right? And, as you talk about yourself as a salesman or an advocate, we absolutely need that. We need somebody continuing to remind us why it's important, not just because the 4-star told us so.
All right, I am seeing questions, but Mike, I'm going to put you on the spot because this is one that always I'll come at it from my perspective, but I'll give you a chance. The DoD is often accused of being financially inefficient. Okay, are you finding new data capabilities that able to respond in new ways? Reduction of waste in military operations. Do you want to tackle that from your perspective, Mike, or do you want to kick it to me? I'll be glad to.
Well, I'll take a shot at starting it. So, I think, I mentioned a little about the Army Futures Command, right? A new organization stood up 2 years ago to make the Army better at buying new things. And so one of the tenets there has been to try to get the people involved late in the process involved earlier. So, from an inefficiency and waste point of view, I'll talk a little bit about testing, right? So before the Army, will sign off on buying something, needs to go through an extensive series of testing, and the Army Test and Evaluation Command is the one that conducts that testing, evaluates the test, judges that it's good. Well, there's a tremendous amount of testing that goes on to get us to that point that organization won't use if they haven't been involved, right? And so one of the tenets has been to get those folks who would normally be involved late in the process to be involved earlier. Now, how does that relate to data and data science, right? So one of the key things that an enabler to that is, well, you know what, if early on in the development of a system, we're conducting analysis or running a test, we need to capture that data, and we need to store it, capture, make it available downstream in a way that the folks later in the process can use it, so that it's not just hey, we ran the test, we put the results in a safe somewhere, never to be seen again. And so I do think that, data management, data analytics is really a key tool to help us get there, to where that information we capture, we're able to go back and we're able to use it later in the process, so that we're not reinventing the wheel, we're not redoing things that we've already done.
So, Chris, I'm going to give you an early warning, but I'll take a crack at this question. Think about anything that you see from a waste or efficiency perspective. I find it a tough question, and I want to dissect the question a little bit, because the inference here is that we are just horribly inefficient with the resources and the tax dollar we spend. And through my career of over 20 years, I have found some of the most dedicated civil servants associated with this, and people do the right things for the right reasons. But efficiency takes on many complexions. Everything from redundancy and perception of making sure military equipment is appropriately utilized. There are so many dimensions to this question that is just really difficult to answer without a degree of precision. However, I will say that organizationally, the department over the past 3 years have been all in on understanding how and where our data is from a financial transaction perspective, so we can budget, we could resource, we can monitor, we could deliver more capabilities with less. Most people believe, and it is true, that the department has a tremendous budget, but it also has a tremendous mission. And we just don't buy pencils and paper clips and things like that. We buy very complex and matters that are really important for the nation and for us to maintain a nation. And it's not easy sometimes. And whether you're talking about logistics data or whether you're talking about financial data, there's a bandwidth. And I think the department, and certainly from our perspective, my perspective, we've been making sure that we've done due diligence on the data associated. So the decision makers not only get roll up data, but get more and have the capabilities of analyzing to depths that we once before didn't have. Mike alluded to it before, a lot of it moved in paper. Well, mining it in paper and mining it even when you organize paper and electronics and PDF files are radically hard to grapple with. And the digitization, the transformation associated with data, all is the point of being efficient and effective. And I have never seen that not on everyone's decision model of being not to be inefficient and non-effective. The resources are usually in various avenues and appropriated by law. So it's difficult for us to move around and maneuver within that. So I think it's always been important in that. I think the real change has been that's where people are trying to find that. The Secretary of Defense had undertaken, looking at the data to find other efficiencies and frankly, sometimes force organizations to become more efficient in their operations. I think it's always to the forefront. Tough question to ask. Chris, any thoughts on efficiency, effectiveness within the banking community, within the regulation community?
Probably not much to add that I didn't already reference in terms of constrained budgets, forcing creativity, fewer resources to examine an ever-growing landscape of financial service providers and how to do that. So I think that, again, at the top, I think there's an understanding that data can help do that, but we're still waiting to see.
All right, I do have another question from the audience. It's a curious one and actually a very precision strike, if you will. I don't know, Mike, if you have anything to offer on this one. The question is, I was aware the Marine Corps is retiring the M1A1 Abrams in order to stand up new capabilities. What data involved in these decisions, and was there lots of hesitation?
Yeah, I apologize. I'm not familiar with that at all, so I really can't speak to that.
Yeah, I just know broadly that whenever a service or a component takes on decisions associated with major weapon systems, there are a lot of very big analytic organizations involved in that. Everybody from the Joint Staff to the cost assessment, the CAPE, as we call it, cost assessment and performance evaluation teams, acquisition community finance. They are very complex decisions. They are always worked very hard before they do that. And, depending on where you ask that question, I'm just glad the senior leaders have those decisions, not me. Okay, I don't see another question from the audience. So got about 12 minutes left or so. I don't want to say final words for the audience, and I don't have a sense of the audience because I can't look around the room to the audience. Chris, I'll start with you. 3 things, if you're told to stand up an analytic and capability, and 3 major considerations that you'd advise anybody going down that path. Sorry, I know I gave you a hard one and a cold one.
So one of the things that has really become clear to me is just to have the right people on the team, for starters. So again, the work that we're doing, unlike what Mike's involved in, which is appears to be a very high degree of coupling between science and research and math, and then the analysis, of course, the data that's being generated as part of that enterprise. We're in a little bit of a different state. And I think what I've discovered, even though I'm obviously hiring very math-minded people, I've realized that it's really critical for us to have very well-balanced people. And so over the years, I have completely retooled my job descriptions for analysts, whereas they used to be much more centered around statistical analysis and those kinds of things. Just my experience with different people on the team, I've realized that I really need people that can switch hit between verbal and quant. That when I had someone with really strong quant, if they didn't understand what the data was and couldn't imagine where it existed in the scheme of the universe and could tell that story and articulate it with words, they weren't going to get the analysis right. Or even if they got the analysis right, that wouldn't propel them in kind of an innovative and creative way to ask harder questions or to really inquire deeper or interrogate correctly what they were producing. They would just run through the mathematical process and give the output and not really be able to interrogate. And even when it comes to just validation, so obviously almost everything we do undergoes peer review, so another analyst is going to look at the work. The job of peer review, in a sense, is a creative enterprise. It's how do I try to check the work of a colleague using a different method, whether it's estimation or whether it's some proxy for some of the things. So you're not just going and doing the exact same thing that they just did and potentially reproducing the exact error, but looking at what they calculated and maybe just starting with a sniff test and orders of magnitude. We have to have contextual understanding of kind of the meaning of the information. So I think that's one big thing, is that, at least for me, if I was just landing somewhere and trying to set up a new shop in an enterprise that wanted to kick off a data analysis capacity that was new, I would definitely really focus largely on the team. So that's one. And then the other thing you referenced from the cover from the top, I think it's really just the key for there to be a vision, because you will be stymied on the change side of things. You might build the greatest analytical doodads the world has ever seen, and then they're just going to sit on a shelf and be to no purpose if it's not integrated with the mission. And then I think really just to have a strong technical backbone to what you're doing, just in terms of data extraction and data modeling, because we're kind of still pretty new at this. My team up until now has done everything soup to nuts. So, with the aside of IT sets up the servers, we're doing all the extraction, all the modeling, all the cataloging, everything. We're hoping to evolve over the next 2 years, really, which is why we brought in Chris Rowley to help us evolve and kind of expand. And that will necessitate now a kind of new partnership with IT, which will own more steps leading up to kind of the data management side of things that I've been wanting, because I want my analysts to focus on analysis. I don't want my analysts to focus on data modeling, which is, it's very important things. It's like dishes and laundry, it has to be done, but it really is wasted capacity in terms of the analysis. So off the top of my head, those are the three in terms of leadership, vision, a really quality team, and then either good partnership with your IT backbone or versatility to be able to do it yourself. And of course, most data nerds have the ability to do it themselves in a pinch.
I want one follow up with you, because you highlight something. It's one of the seams that I always find in a spectrum. That seam between analysis and analytics. Analysts don't want to do data. They just want to do it there, and they want to do the analysis. How do you handle that one? Because sometimes I struggle with. I'm like, I need some help with data definitions and data understanding, and they're like, don't bother me. That just seems to be a nexus seam or a pivot point seam in all of our processes that we can get right or we can get wrong.
We really don't wrestle with the issue now, because my shop does everything. And I grew up in my father's business long ago, learning SQL in high school. And so I come from how data fits together mentality. And so I actually am not averse to getting in there. And I found that bringing my team members, onboarding new team members who are math oriented or stats oriented, and throwing them in the pool of data modeling is really good for them. So maybe that's kind of sadistic on my part, but I like that because I think it builds the understanding of how data works. The challenge that we'll face as we now grow our capacity and stand up a data management capacity separate from analysis, the question that we will be wrestling with is how not to lose our bearings and how to make sure that the analysts who are probably kind of the data stewards, who are probably have the deepest knowledge of the narrative of the data, stay in very tight coordination with those resources that are helping us to do the modeling. So that's going to be, that's very much on my mind, front of mind as we evolve how we solve that. So I'm sure large organizations have to deal with this and would have more stories to tell, but being new, there is an advantage to having to do it all in some sense, because it keeps your people honest and keeps the system robust. And I would say we have very, very tight data management because it's so closely held. You know, Mike talked about 30, 40 people working on something. I can't imagine trying to coordinate that. It just seems like you have to have a lot more structure and communication going on in that case.
Yeah, great sentiments. Mike, top 3 things. You're managing a big organization. I'm going to go last and copy all your homework. But Mike, what are the top 3 things that you want the audience to think about data management analytics? You have a big organization. You work for the Army.
Yep. So yeah, and I'll maybe kind of springboard on a couple of things that Chris brought out, right? So, you know, from a people point of view, I think we've bounced back and forth a little bit as we've looked at what data science is, right? So, you know, like I said, we're operations research analysts, and, you know, we're sort of used to this multidisciplinary thing. And, you know, the past several years, you know, I've been getting beat up by my boss saying, well, we need to do more data science. We need more data scientists in the organization. And I think I've reached the conclusion that basically, you know, we got an organization of 600 analysts. They're already data scientists, right? What we're really trying to do is put new tools in their toolbox, and, you know, how do we kind of take that and run with it? And so, you know, and I think, you know, as I've talked to, you know, a couple of people who are really these early adopters in the field, you know, they've said within the sort of the field, there's been this sort of, I guess, back and forth as far as, you know, to be a data scientist, you know, there's this idea of comp sci, of database management, of math, of statistics, of visualization, all these different disciplines. And so I think for a while they were trying to create all those disciplines in a single person. And I think now the sort of the theory is bounced to, well, you know, we need these multidisciplinary teams where each person knows a little bit about everything, but they're really bringing their own specialty to the field. So I think being thoughtful about that, being thoughtful about the people, you know, kind of as Chris suggests, is important. I guess one other kind of learning point I draw out is as far as, you know, analysis versus analytics, right? When we were trying to figure out, well, what's data science, right? So, you know, somebody comes in with this, I think, famous Walmart example. I assume it's famous. Maybe it's just urban legend by now. But the idea that Walmart, when there's a hurricane coming, they've looked at data and they know that people are going to buy strawberry Pop-Tarts. They don't know why people are going to buy strawberry Pop-Tarts, but by God, if there's a hurricane coming, they're bringing out pallets of strawberry Pop-Tarts, putting them in the front of their stores. And I think as analysts, we kind of scoffed at that and said, well, you know what? I care why. You know, it's not sufficient just to know that, hey, this trend is out there, but we as analysts want to dig in and really understand the why. And so I do think that's important, that layer of understanding behind the phenomena that the data is showing us has happened. And then the third point I'd bring up is the idea of governance, right? So I talked about us sorting through what do we keep, what do we discard and embrace something new. We have a very strong data governance structure for our data. We have the stakeholders, the users of that data, you know, sit on a configuration control board where we manage that. If we're getting into a new area, it's really a collaboration between the data developer and the data user. And so maintaining that governance was something that we found was very important for us, given that area. So being thoughtful about how you're going to govern that data, how you're going to manage those data standards. So I'll pause there. The last word, Mark. Over.
Mike, Chris, wonderful sentiments. My one lament is when we would do with Boston, we would have dinner one night in Boston. I always found this forum, and thanks Robert and team and Elizabeth, Gertrude. This is, to me, it's always been organizational therapy. We've all been able to go through the environment and share what we've done right and share what we've done wrong and encourage us across that. And I think your points, there's nothing I could really add to that. You know, having a vision. Now I can add one to it. Having a vision, having strong governance, building a strong team, recognizing that you need diversity in a team, and being sure that you're partnering inside and outside the organization extensively. And the only thing I would add is, I had the benefit of taking a little bit of leadership seminar or sat in on a webinar in these difficult times, is having the courage to do it. And because it's this space just seems to be difficult, but the missions that we accomplish, you know, for the taxpayer, for the users, are just profound, whether it's the safety of the nation or the safety of their bank accounts. You know, these are really important missions. And Mike and Chris, please thank Chris. Please thank Greg for me. You were both wonderful participants in this panel. Thank you. Thank you very much. And I hope you participate with us again. And we are a community. With that, back to you, Elizabeth. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Krzysko. Chris, Mike, great job. Appreciate. We had over 580 unique IP address log in to listen to our interesting conversation. Thank you, three, for all your generosity of time and talent to share your tips and tricks with us and your stories of data. Thank you so much. And I think we're on to a lunch break at this point.
All right, we'll go get lunch on our own, Elizabeth. Thank you very much.
Next time we buy.
Have a great day. Thank you.